Rafiq in a second. Do we have a right to offend?
Not just a right, but there's a necessity to offend. When something is standing there, it's perfectly obvious, which needs saying. I know Geert Wilders a bit, who made the film in Holland. I knew the people who made the last film that did this in Holland, because Theo van Gogh was shot and beheaded on the streets of Amsterdam, and his colleague Ayn Hassiali was chased into hiding. People are very aware of the danger of criticising Islam. They take the lesson from it, and a lot of people still fail, despite this, to realise the incredible irony at the root of all this, which is a group of people who say my religion is peaceful, or I'll kill you.
Yeah, but never mind that. What about Jerry Springer, the opera? What about other examples?
Well, but Jerry Springer, the opera, gets protests, as I gather happened the other week with Professor Dawkins. You get protests, but does anyone honestly think that they're likely to be killed for making a joke about Jesus Christ? No, of course not. There's The Life of Brian. There's countless films about it.
Lots of people are equally offended by that.
Well, of course they're offended, and they have a right to be offended by it. But what happens when one religion manages to have a totalitarian hold over freedom of speech in it because people are genuinely concerned about criticising it? There is a problem, and that is an unequal situation. You say one religion will be absolutely allowed to be let free from all of these criticisms.
This Dutch film that was taken off the internet, this Dutch film, the contention of the film was that Islam is a violent religion, and it had to be taken off the internet because of death threats. So some people say, kind of proves the point. But surely that is an argument that we need freedom of speech. We need the right to ridicule. We need the right to offend, don't we?
Well, personally, I mean, I'm European through and through, and I would absolutely not want to legislate on people's right to express their opinions, and absolutely. But I think more worrying is, why are we asking the question of, do we have the right to insult? I mean, I don't walk around in my day-to-day thinking, I'd really like to insult somebody, but do I have the right to do it?
Okay,
I think perhaps we should be...
What about the Ben Elton point? We've had loads of comedies. Remember, people of a certain generation, as old as me and older, remember Dave Allen, all the jokes about priests. We remember that we've got the Vicar of Dibley. Are we going to get the Imam of Bingham? Are we going to Bingley? Where is the sitcom in a mosque?
I mean, actually, it's funny you say that. There's a Canadian program called Little Mosque on the Prairie, which is a comical show. No, it is. It's Little Mosque on the Prairie.
And
it's a comical show, and absolutely not. There's been an astounding reaction to it. People have loved it, and they've loved the insight that this has brought into kind of the day-to-day of normal Muslims. Not the ranting and raving people that we typically see on TV.
Keep what to your spoon. We have a right to ridicule, but do we have a right to offend? A lot of it, like the cartoons, it's just gratuitous, isn't it?
But directly taking that on, I've just come back from the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, and their intent, the Organisation of Islamic Countries, in getting international defamation of religion legislation. So worldwide freedom of speech is going to be impinged, and that's dreadful. That's what underlines our whole democracy and our civilization, is freedom of speech. Fortunately, we're
freedom
getting...
to say anything you want.
The dividing line, the line is inciting hate speech, inciting violence. You should be protecting the person, not the religion.
OK, Douglas Murray, Harris Rafiq in a second. Do we have a right to offend?
Not just a right, but there's a necessity to
ridicule.
Absolutely. I think there's nothing wrong with ridiculing, with criticising, with speaking up against something, whether it's religion, whether it's somebody's point of view, etc. Where I would draw the line, and I draw the line here for Muslims and non-Muslims as well, is that where there is incitement to hate and violence. Now, let me give you an example of this. Recently, we had...
it's a thin line, though, isn't it?
It's a very thin line.
Grey area.
Absolutely. Recently, we had a case where we had Yusuf Qaradawi, who is a hardcore Islamist, somebody who actually promotes suicide bombing in the Middle East, and rightfully so. He was banned from coming into this country. Rightly so, he wasn't given a platform, and the reasons for that were that here is somebody who would have been given a platform to incite this hatred, would have been given legitimacy, would have been able to sprout his views. But I think in a case where we have somebody who wants to, like Dave Allen or somebody else, wants to actually make some satire, make jokes about people, Britain has a history of that. We have a history of ridiculing each other, and I think there's a difference between
we have hatred. A sense of ridiculousness.
Absolutely. There's a stark difference between death threats. There's a stark difference between hatred and ridicule and mockery, and I think that's where the line is drawn.
What about Nick Griffin, Christina O'Doney? And Robert Shaikh, I'll bring him in here. Nick Griffin of the BNP and also David Irving, the notorious Holocaust denier. They were given a platform recently at the Oxford Union. Was that right?
Yes. We have to. We have to be able, as people of one faith or many faiths, to withstand that kind of offensive criticism, that kind of vicious attack.
But what about somebody who lost relatives in the Holocaust, seeing that man up there at the Oxford Union?
Banning free speech is a cornerstone of totalitarian regimes. And they're the very ones that have been persecuting religions for all the 20th century and now into the 21st. Look at the Chinese with the Tibetan monks. We cannot, if we want to have the moral high ground, if we as religious people want to have the moral high ground, we cannot play that dirty card that the totalitarian regimes do.
Rabbi Shaikh, yet if we give a platform to Holocaust deniers, that's what ultimately leads into taking it to the next step of gravestones being defaced with swastikas and whatever else besides. There is no such a thing, bottom line, of freedom of speech. There are always gray areas, there are always laws. I mean, if I choose to say something terribly grotesque about the Queen on national television, there are consequences for that. So there is a bottom line that there is no such thing as freedom of speech. I would only say this. If you want to talk about freedom of speech, let that always be in the context of responsible speech.
Rabbi.
You can have freedom of speech as long as it isn't anything too terrible. The real point of freedom of speech is when it is terrible. And the other point is that by allowing these people to speak, and I agree for the first time for a long time with Christine, that you actually expose them you actually expose them to criticism, and you don't have the speech being festered. If you stop it, it festers. It isn't exposed.
Does it fester, or does it legitimise Islamophobia, homophobia, misogyny, and all the other phobias that I can't think of right now?
No.
Does it not?
No. You get it out, and these people are sitting.
You get it out.
If you have freedom of speech, people are allowed to criticise it, and so the people who need to hear that criticism hear it.
And it's argued against, and it's defeated by words.
I think that gentleman said it absolutely, pretty right on the mark, where you're saying that if we allow the whole idea of freedom of speech, and I say this all the time, others have done so as well, and that is the entirety or the reason that we have freedom of speech is really it is to allow my freedom of speech, for me to say what I want to say. But its real intention is for me to be able to listen to the speech that I would hate myself to hear, that I don't want to hear, that I don't want anyone to say, that I don't want anyone to speak of, that I don't want anyone to write about. That's what's protected. That's the reason for freedom of speech. In a way, it's sort of not about I, but about everybody else. What about theirs? And then the onus then goes back upon them. Because I might say something that they don't want to hear absolutely at all, but they have to listen to it. And as long as we don't come up to the part where it's actionable, meaning that it's actionable in terms of causing violence, or your rhetoric, or the way you speak, is in a way to go ahead and allow people to incite, to commit an act that would be considered violent. That's where you draw the line. And as the gentleman basically said there, if we allow that kind of speech that we just can't stand, that we're just abhorrent to hear, vile, just whatever you want to, however you want to modify it. If we allow that speech to be heard, then there are probably 99.99% of the people behind us that are feeling exactly the same way, and that speech will literally, rhetorically, it'll just be snuffed out in the space of social media, in the space of our speaking, our talking, because there are going to be tons of people, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that would just come in and say, that is absolutely wrong. And they'll have their idea of speech to condemn that speech. And they have that right because they have freedom of speech. But if you allow it to fester and you don't allow it to be told or be spoken, That's where it starts to fester. That's where it starts to grow. Just because somebody comes and says, we deny the Holocaust, okay, fine, he's an idiot, he's a moron, a retard. And we tell him that. You're an idiot, you're a moron, you're a retard. And not only does he hear it from us, he hears it from everybody else. And there might be a handful of people, but letting them say that allows us. Because if they don't say that, how do we know who they are? Anyways, let's get back to this fascinating discussion. In the meantime, folks, you're watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, and this is what we have on tap for you today, where we've got people like Richard Dawkins, Douglas Murray, and others in the audience that come clashing together, all from different backgrounds, different faiths, ethnicities, heritages. It's what happens when social media, religion, science, philosophy, they all collide. Let's get back to the interview right now.
If you have somebody like Nick Griffin speaking on a platform, if you have somebody like Karadawi or Abu Hamza, all you need is one person in the audience who's going to take note of what he has to say, move forward and go and bomb somebody or kill somebody. And that's where we need to draw the line. We cannot tolerate the intolerable. If something is intolerable, we must, as a society, have a collective responsibility to stop it.
You don't have to give a platform to Nick Griffin. The Oxford Union was wrong to give him a platform. But does he have a right to say what he says? Yes, I suppose so, just like Holocaust denial. The problem is that when we talk about Holocaust denial and things like this in the same context as freedom of speech today, Holocaust denial is wrong for many reasons, but one of them is because it's a lie. It's a lie to pretend the Holocaust didn't happen, so you're giving a platform to a liar. When somebody says, as Geert Wilders has done, these are verses in the Quran, and these are what some Muslims do in response to that, that's not a lie, that's just a statement of fact.
Many of the most important social freedoms and advances have been brought about by people who caused great offence in their time. Galileo, Charles Darwin, they caused offence to the church because they spoke out against the church orthodoxy. The first people who spoke out against slavery caused great offence. Those who denounced the church and the way the church supported slavery, they were denounced and condemned for causing offence.
I could say that would offend you?
Well, there may be plenty of things you can say, but you have the right to say them, providing you don't incite violence against other human beings.
But how do we not legislate is the wrong word, but how do we make sure that people don't cross that line? Because it's a very grey area, isn't it? Miriam, you wanted to come back in.
Well, I mean, I was going to say there are certainly things that are offensive, but do we need to offend people by saying them? I mean, there's a way of saying things. We can discuss the institution of the monarchy in this country without insulting the Queen. It therefore makes it perfectly reasonable and possible to discuss, I think, the tenets and beliefs of any other religion without insulting sensibilities.
So insulting sensibilities, that's interesting. Without insulting sensibilities. Okay, some Muslims think that music and dancing are haram and should be forgiven, not forgiven, wrong word, Freudian slip, forbidden, haram, that it's forbidden. So if I were to say, music, forbidden, haram, that is just bonkers. Now, some people are going to find that extremely offensive, aren't they? Have I offended sensibilities? Do I have the right to say that?
I think if people that are used to having debates within the interfaith debates are pretty familiar with the codes and practices of different religions and understand where those boundaries lie. And certainly that would not be one of those boundaries. But there are certain things that even people with no religion would find offensive. If I was to come on TV and start insulting, I mean, I hate to be crass, but your mother, that would be extremely offensive. Now, we feel as strongly about our mothers as we do about the Prophet Muhammad. That doesn't mean you can't discuss what he says, the message he brings.
People in this country put up with being offended.
Walking
down a street, you get offended. There's somebody wearing something you don't like, or you get offended. It's part of being grown up. It's just accepting the fact that you get your feelings trodden upon. Does it mean you have to deliberately tread on people's feelings? No, not necessarily.
Exactly.
But what you cannot do is to ring fence one ideology through fear, intimidation, or anything else. And that is what we see happening. That's what Ben Ellsworth is saying.
Richard Dawkins, Professor, you've obviously, I mean, a lot of people have taken offence at some of the things that you've written. They feel personally offended because they feel that their faith, which is so dear to them, and their belief, which they cherish, you're criticising it. Do you think about that?
I don't go out of my way to offend.
No, but do you think about the possible consequences?
If people are offended, then they may argue against me. All I use is words. There's a radical distinction between using words and violence and incitement to violence. the Salman Rushdie affair brings this out. Salman Rushdie simply wrote a book. That's what he did. He wrote a book. He was threatened with death. He was threatened with death by baying crowds in this country. People burned his books. They demanded the death penalty.
And some leading parliamentarians suggested that the paperback shouldn't come out.
Some leading parliamentarians, some leading clergymen, some leading bishops sided with the Ayatollah Khomeini rather than sided with this very distinguished novelist who did no more than put words on paper. That is a radical distinction.
Can I let Miriam come back in and discuss this with you,
I do sort of
Professor?
feel like we're talking about issues in a vacuum here. I mean, you're talking about the fatwa against Salman Rushdie. Are we forgetting that we're talking about Khomeini? Are we forgetting that we're talking about the 1979 revolution and the context in which that was occurring? And similarly, when we talk about, the reaction, the highly unacceptable, violent reaction of some Muslims, I would like to add, to films like Geert Wilders' films and Van Gogh's film, etc. We're almost talking like it's completely decontextualized. It's not happening in a vacuum.
Okay.
Muslims around the world feel victimized.
You're completely wrong. One of the people who supported the fatwa against Salman Rushdie was now Sir Iqbal Sakrani, a leader of the Muslim Council of Britain. He got a knighthood after saying that death was too good for Salman Rushdie. And he's a leader. He was a leader of the Muslim Council of Britain.
A.L. Kennedy, do you think that anything goes?
Yeah, I think we need freedom of speech. What alarms me more than anything is that freedom of speech is being constantly redefined as the right to offend, and it's only the negative aspects that we're being shown. And that leads to absurdities like the photographs from the torture at Abu Ghraib are redefined in terms of these photographs are offensive and are causing unrest. And you don't get the dialogue which is about it's offensive to torture people, that causes unrest, and photographs of torture. And you have this absurd situation where the more true something is, and we are quite often talking about questions of belief and questions of factual, provable truth, the more true something is, the more offensive it will be. So, for example, you can't, or you would want to watch putting an article into a newspaper about a corporation because it would offend the corporation. And if it's true, you would want to be even more careful because it would impact even more on the share price. So this whole kind of right to offend seems to prevent truth from appearing now.
And what was so interesting in our earlier debate was we had a Christian evangelical who was, we have to admit, pretty offensive if you were gay, and yet Richard didn't think that that was allowed. So we are not allowed, we are allowed to have Muslims feel offended, but not Christians.
I didn't say she shouldn't speak.
Richard, you said that she was pretty offensive.
I didn't say she shouldn't speak. Of course she's free to speak. I simply said that her personal opinion is of no interest on a factual matter where there is evidence.
Richard, what do you think that means?
You can always have a difference of opinion, and when there is a difference of opinion, you're pro-homosexuality, she's anti-homosexuality, so be it, you put those opinions out in the arena. Where it gets downright offensive, when you're going to offend millions of people who died in a Holocaust by saying it never happened, that's fundamentally wrong.
But Sir Rabbi, should David Irving not have been, should David Irving not be allowed to talk?
Bishop Tom, let's go on to this. As a final thought, Bishop Tom, cartoons, for a second, can I just take you to a specific point? There have been cartoons of, God, a white man on a cloud in our culture and civilization for eons. It's not something we get concerned about. Why should we make special rules for other people?
But there are different cultures. I mean, what was it, 10 years, 15 years ago, Spitting Image portrayed Jesus Christ as a hippie. We were terribly pleased about it, but we live with that culture. The Muslim community in this country said, he's one of our prophets. You don't denigrate our prophet.
The Life of Brian was a similar kerfuffle, wasn't it?
Now, actually, that was a very interesting kind of meeting of different cultures, different habits. And if we're going to share one country, and if we're going to have social cohesion, we've got to respect one another and think before we act.
Britain is one of the most...
I have not got the freedom here now to shout fire, because if I do...
You would. You do have the right. If it's on fire, you should shout fire.
Yes, but if it's not on fire, you don't shout fire. There's a limit to
So we have to watch our P's and Q's.
We have to watch about shouting fire in the public arena if that is going to damage our social cohesion.
Britain is one of the most multicultural, multi-faith countries in the world, and it's just not possible to carry on in a way you don't offend anyone. The answer is we don't have the right not to be offended, any of us.
Thank you all very much indeed. Do you...
Very, very interesting discussion there. I mean, sometimes, it's like a tug of war almost. I'm sitting here listening, I'm saying, yeah, that person's making some good points. Okay, wait a minute, but that person's making some good points. Oh, wait a minute. I was over here, do you have the right to offend? Yes, you absolutely have the right to offend. Should you offend? That is the question. To offend or not to offend? That's really the question. Bottom line. We all know freedom of speech up to the point of incitement, up to the point of violence, up to the point. But the final thing is that we live in a multicultural society, multi-plural, multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-heritage, multicolor, multi-religious, multi-everything, folks. And the bottom line is that I think you weigh, when you're writing something, saying something, what am I trying to do with this piece? With my speech, with my writing, with my words? What is my ultimate goal in stating it, saying it, writing it? Am I just doing it just to get attention and tick and piss people off and that's it? And maybe then that's not. But am I trying to educate people about something? And I know that when I'm saying something with my words, I'm bringing light to the matter. I'm not lying about something, but I'm bringing out forward. I'm just asking why. Or why can't I say something about it? Those are the questions we've got to ask in the final analysis. Anyways, folks, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, and if you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to subscribe to our channel if you find our content exciting and interesting. Don't forget to like, share, and follow us. You all know what to do. Take a look at our other video links here and here. My final thought is always, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.